I'm Eric Loy, and welcome to Eric Loy Interviews. On this podcast, we talk with folks from the VTuber community on their channels, their talents, their stories, where they come from, and their plans for the future. We are joined by Mildra the Monk. Hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I enjoy being had.
Well, we appreciate you coming over. Could you please introduce yourself to everybody?
Well, I am Mildra. I'm a variety streamer and content creator who specializes in things like tabletop RPGs, board and card games, way too many games and works all over the place when it comes to geekdom, and with an emphasis on showcasing what's out there, which I'm sure we'll get into throughout this.
Folks, if you think I've been doing a lot of interviews this year, you got to check out what Mildra's got on the channel. Holy moly. you
Yeah, I've got all my interviews in a playlist on my channel, and that playlist at the time of this recording is 948 videos long.
Whoa. Oh,
And that is over the course of like 5 years.
that's not, we're not talking 5-minute sound bites. We're talking long content interviews.
hmm
So I mean, how long have you been doing that?
So on the VTubing thing, I've only been doing that for a few months.
Yeah.
I started that on August 27th of this year.
Hmm.
But in terms of content creation, I started that on August 27th, 10 years ago.
Whoa. Yeah. So
And
you're a veteran of the wars.
obviously, yeah. I and my YouTube channel, well, I've had that in one form or another since 2008.
Now you're
It's
talking.
just, it's
Yeah, you're talking ancient times now.
Yeah, I jumped on in the very early days of YouTube.
And you obviously had a successful time of it, with all the
hmm
stuff that you've been able to do. Um, what are these interviews that you've got up about, and how did you get started in them?
So when it comes to the interviews, I can't talk about them without talking about the impact that crowdfunding in general and Kickstarter in particular has had within the tabletop gaming space. I would say
Mhm.
it's been more successful in that space and to a lesser extent in comic books than in other spaces like comic books or video games alike. That's not to say that there aren't successful crowdfunds in those ventures. It's just easier to do a successful TTRPG because on the cost sense, a lot of the projects are done by one man or one woman operations,
Right.
and and this runs the gamut from small time stuff to big time affairs. I've covered every manner on that,
Hmm.
and for in my earlier years, I had a format of my podcast that was under the name Monastery Live.
Okay.
Originally, it was a news reaction thing
Hmm.
with the occasional roasting of Florida man stories or stories that were Florida man like but weren't in Florida.
Right. Florida man on
And
vacation stories.
a good chunk now a good chunk of those stories were on highlighting various indie games that were in the works or looking for funding on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or GameFound over in Europe.
Hmm.
Uh, and I had with one particular project I had talked about called Carbine Jungle by Meme Lord NorCal Mythos.
Okay.
Uh, I was having too much fun going through just reading their Kickstarter, and I was like, I gotta find a way to do an interview with this guy. I didn't realize that he'd be watching that live stream, and he ended up reaching out saying, "Yeah, I'd love to come on." So we did that interview. It ended up going about 2 hours. I was having way too much fun with it, and I thought, maybe I can do this with other developers.
Yeah.
And I started branching out and sending messages, usually through Kickstarter or otherwise, saying, "Hey, this is who I am. And I'd like to interview you." It was a bit tricky early on, but as I did more of them, it became easier to do them.
Hmm.
And in some cases, people end up coming to me.
Right. Right.
And It also caused me to develop my seething hatred of time zones, but that's natural when you're dealing with people from all over the planet.
Oh yeah,
Because
and that
it's not just stateside that my guests have been on. I've had a lot of guests in Brazil and Italy for some
hmm
reason, a lot
hmm
of guests in the UK, some of them in Southeast Asia.
yeah,
And as a general rule, I try and nail down what time zone someone's in just so I know what difference I'm working with.
right.
But how it started was just as another means of showcasing what's out there.
hmm
And it hasn't been until fairly recently that I began to realize that my very detailed approach is in the minority. I figured that what I was doing was the bare minimum.
So you thought you thought you still had a ways to go yet, when in fact you were 4 laps up.
Yeah, because I kept having people say that they appreciated how in depth that I get into the mechanics of some of a given work,
hmm
or get into things like color theory if I'm talking about a comic. And I just figured that was just standard fare for anybody who's trying to be a journalist.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I never studied journalism. I studied economics.
Mm. Well, these days it's about the same.
Uh,
Yeah, there's a
although,
lot of parallels in the world these days between those two, I can unfortunately say. But
well, you're never going to see me actually apply for a professional journalism job because that'd be the shortest job of my life.
yeah, yeah, I can tell you the truth. I'm telling people all the time, it's not a great place to go. Maybe 20 years ago, 30 some years ago when I started, but
It might be a great place if I feel like throwing hands with somebody, but that's it.
well, you could do that on the
And
internet.
screw that. I'll just go to a hockey match.
There you go. There you go. You go to
It did,
go to a fight and have a hockey game break out. That'll be perfect.
yeah.
That'll be perfect.
Oh, I've heard that plenty of times. I did my fair share of amateur hockey years ago, and I because of my size, I was basically I was basically a defenseman whose whole job was find the guy who had the puck and make them regret their life choices. My
We
coach would say, hey, Monk, you see that guy with the puck over there? Yes, I do, sir. I don't want to. Fix that. Okay.
you were a specialist.
Yeah.
Yes.
And hey, it's a contact sport. Things happen in full contact.
Yes.
That's
And you try to make as full of contact as possible. I understand.
well, there's some rules. I'm not going to wall bang somebody,
Mm. Well, what if the
and I'm
wall
not
was
going
in
to
the
touch the
way?
goalie because
Yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah,
understand.
I don't aim for the face. I don't aim high, and I don't touch the goalie because if you touch the goalie, then the rest of the team is going to want your head on a plate.
Oh yeah, and the crowd. If you're on the
And I can
road.
handle that. But yeah, it's when I started my channel 10 years ago. The goal was to showcase what was out there because I was frustrated that I was seeing so many very, very good games on the indie side of things
hmm
that weren't being talked about by people who had much bigger platforms than me. And whenever I talked about doing this, everybody was telling me, "No, that's not going to work. Nobody's going to watch that." And I'm like, "I don't care if 500 people are going to watch it. I'm going to try this because I'd rather that than just being a dog sitting on a nail complaining about it hurting."
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember.
And two, I mean, you obviously got into it because this was your project to do. I mean, if other people jumped on it, great, but you wanted to give these people publicity.
Yeah, and for a lot of I've had to learn over the years that a lot of people who are developing games are one very very shit at marketing. Oh, my bad.
No, don't worry about that. We're 18 plus.
But also the fact that they are starved for any kind of attention. Most of the time, the only way that they have to get eyes on their work is conventions.
hmm
And even then there's trouble because with some projects, especially the ones that are more manga influenced that I've covered, they have an easier time getting eyes on their work at anime and gaming cons than at tabletop gaming cons.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
and I've told with people who do that kind of thing, I've told them don't go to the bit don't try and go to the big conventions on tabletop. Don't go to Gen Con or Gamehole. Go to the smaller ones. Go to the ones that do not have people as anal about the idea of bringing in weeb shit into tabletop.
yeah. You gotta you break it into an audience that's more receptive
Mm-hmm.
when you do it that way, and then and you brought the word right up, marketing. And then it starts to, if you get some momentum, then it starts to creep in everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely perfect. And there's a lot of folks that not only with as starters games, but on their VTuber channels that don't necessarily grasp some basic concepts of marketing that would help them out in the long run.
Yeah, and I will note that the idea of I didn't go into creation with the intent of becoming a VTuber.
Mhm.
Because obviously, when I started 10 years ago, VTubing wasn't even really a thing by that point.
No, 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 no.
But when I started catching an eye on things, I started to realize that I was gradually pushing myself in that direction just with how I was presenting things.
Yeah.
The Mildra name has been a name I've been using in online work for a very, very long time. I'd say I started using it in the mid 2000s.
Right.
And I was already kind of depicting a character with the idea of the monastery, with the way that I had branded a lot of these shows, calling my show the Open Bar of the Internet, and some of my friends who had dove headfirst into VTubing before I did had said that I was already halfway to that point as it was, so I may as well just make the final jump.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense.
And when I find when the ideas started getting in my head, it's a case of once an idea is strong enough in your head, it doesn't leave until you see it through. And what ultimately helped push me forward on that is I came to the realization that when it comes to tabletop gaming and V2ing,
Mm-hmm.
the material that's out there is very sparse. A lot of times a lot of the ones I've seen are mostly doing like actual plays, and like nobody in that space is really diving headfirst into the creation process of TTRPGs or the like.
Yeah. Now, the hows as opposed to the whys.
Hmm.
Mm.
And when it comes to doing actual plays, like everybody does an actual play, it's not that hard.
Right.
Uh, it but a lot of them were focusing on your D&Ds, your Pathfinders, maybe you'd get a World of Darkness or two if you're lucky. Whereas if someone took a gander at my channel, they'd see that I barely cover D&D the way other channels focus entirely on that.
Oh yeah.
And that was one of my goals from the word go.
Yeah.
Everybody else is going to be talking about D&D. I don't feel like adding to that pile.
Yeah. There is a lot of folks who concentrate on that, which warms my heart a little bit because I played some. I wasn't a full time person on it, but I played a little bit back when it was one book. I mean, but so I it's nice to know that that's still going on and people are still enjoying it.
Yeah. But moreover, I do plenty of reviews, and in my reviews, I've styled it as me being a tailor.
Hmm.
I'm trying to tailor pick a given a game that might work for people. There's this idea that say D&D can work for just about everybody. In my experience, find that that's only true to a point.
Right.
And when you have to do a bunch of house rules to the point where you're becoming a backseat designer, I feel like a threshold's been crossed.
Mm.
I mean, people give Todd Howard and Bethesda all the manner of shit for the amount of mods that you have to put in to make Bethesda games work. So in tabletop, I don't think it should be given any leeway on that. If one end is going to get that amount of guff, then the other one too
Well,
has to as well.
right, right, right. It's it's always a matter of perspective, though. And
Hmm.
what you're kind of doing with your interviews here is giving a different perspective by going
Yeah,
straight to the people who are straight to the people who are making the games, developing the games, and getting into their thought processes of why and how they're doing the games.
a common story that I've seen is somebody who was playing a certain game a lot, but wanted to do things their own way. One thing leads to another, and then they started up making a game.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that's one way to do it.
that has yeah, that is a that's not an isolated case. Or somebody wasn't quite satisfied with the games that they were running, so they wanted to do it themselves. And that's one of the beauties of TTRPGs.
Hmm.
It is a means that for people to express creativity in a group setting without a high skill floor.
Okay, I understand that. I understand that. And it does, but I think too you can take a lot of, well, 100% of them probably, and go down the family tree, and it'll start with D&D.
Mm, not as many as you think.
Really?
Yeah,
So where else would they come off of?
it ultimately depends.
Hmm.
Especially now, if we're talking about North America, that's definitely the case. But in places like Brazil, you'd be more likely to see it from something like Tormenta, or 3D and T. Those are the bigger entries down in Brazil. In Germany, you're more likely to see it from Das Schwarze Auge or the Dark Eye,
Hmm.
which became a thing because TSR wanted to do a German translation of D&D, but things fell through. So the German publisher at the time was like, "Screw that, we'll make our own D&D," and that became DSA. Uh, in Sweden, you've got stuff like Mutant and of course Free League is the kings over there.
Right.
Um, and then there's the Japanese TTRPG space where D&D had its moment in the spotlight for a few years,
Hmm.
but only basic because the advanced book was a long and expensive process to translate, and by the time it came out, Tunnels and Trolls had come out and kind of stole its thunder. Plus, there was never a wargaming scene in Japan to be the starting point for TTRPGs. It sprang more from the computer gaming scene.
Oh.
And one of the earliest examples was Wizardry back in the late 80s.
Mm.
There was a TTRPG adaptation of Wizardry back in 1988. I don't
So
know how that game worked because nobody's translated that version yet,
right.
but the computer gaming space played a much bigger role in the development of TTRPGs in Japan than um, wargaming did.
Mm. So when they were going the other way around with the U.S. stuff in D&D, people were trying to convert that into the computers, and very early on they did. I mean, I played them. I played them on the
Yeah,
Commodore 64.
the earliest incarnation would be the D&D adaptation on the Plato engine back in the 70s.
Oh yeah, that was, and I was in the middle of the Play-Doh. I I
Hmm.
I lived in the same city as Play-Doh, but the
Yeah,
the the Gold Box series of games that came out.
yeah,
My friends and I were all over
and
those.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that the late James Ward has visited my temple, and we did get a bit of conversation about that,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, and how?
as well as
Well,
things like the transition between um, first and second edition D&D.
mm. And in the war whoops that came up because of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that nobody likes their icons to move a little bit sometimes, but
Uh,
I mean
oh yeah, I've
it's always,
been through my
yeah. I know exactly what you're talking. It's people don't necessarily, if they're really stuck with something and they see something that might alter it a little bit. No, I'm an original person. I'm not going to go for that. Well, you're missing out.
Uh, I've called those kind of people Schroders. Because Schroeder always had a security. It was either Linus or Schroeder.
Yeah,
It's been a while since I read anything of Peanuts.
yeah,
The whole security blanket thing,
right,
just
right.
with no piano skills.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
But especially since imagine taking that approach with any other medium. Refusing to imagine refusing to watch NASCAR because of a rule change between seasons, or ima- imagine imagine because of the fact that new filming technologies are being introduced in film, refusing to go see a movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in NASCAR, they change rules in between races
Uh,
sometimes. But yeah,
and
I know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
It's throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Mhm.
Is what it's doing most of the time. Now, I
Yeah.
am guilty of that myself because I don't watch Major League Baseball anymore, and I loved it and grew up with it. But I think the rules they've got in now are stupid and it just ruins the game for me. But that's because I'm a bitter old man. um, but it does happen, and if you don't adapt with it, and you're stuck with a game that you enjoy, but you could enjoy it so much more.
The analogy that I often use when it comes to it is to look at the state of things when it comes to the sim racing genre in video games,
Mm,
which has stubbornly refused to change in the name of keeping certain traditions,
right.
or this idea that you have to go with this degree of pursuing realism above everything else, and in the process forgetting that you're making a game, not a simulator that's meant to be used by professional drivers, because only pros would be able to afford that.
Right. Yeah.
And because I guess one of the best analogies in that is a few years ago when Project Cars 2 came out. A bunch of pundits and a bunch of fans made a big damn deal about the fact that the game could host private lobbies. Other genres, especially shooters, have been able to do private lobbies and get that down pat since the late 90s.
Mm, yeah. But you know, it's again, it's moving somebody's cheese. It
Mhm.
they're used to this cheese being over there. They don't want it being over there. They don't want it, having a different wrapper. They want it to be the same. They're comfortable with it. Don't change it.
Yeah, though too much comfort can lead to stagnation is the key there. Hell, you kind of saw that in history um with what happened when it came to film.
Hmm.
Like the film studios back in the 60s could not adapt as quickly as other mediums could when it came to the new generations that were coming about.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And their approach was, especially since they not only couldn't adapt to countercultures coming in quick enough, but also weren't able to adapt to television becoming more affordable.
Yeah.
And their approach was, oh, we're going to get if the television is going to give you a little bit, we're going to give you a whole lot of it, which is where you get those big bloated Cecil B. DeMille kind of productions. And for every Ten Commandments or Ben Hur, you've got a Cleopatra, which is considered one of the biggest bombs of its era.
Yeah, I don't even want to try to watch that.
I
Oh,
did I did for a cringe watch years ago, and once was enough. Oh, where you get things like Singing in the Rain, which is considered one of the worst performing movies of all time.
yeah. But then again, they were just kept going into old, just digging in the old toolbox and coming up with the same old tools. Um,
Hmm.
but then you also look at something like Casino Royale that overdid trying to change things and ended up being, I'm talking about the Woody Allen Peter Sellers version. That
Hmm.
is just such a mess.
Yeah, it's really a pendulum,
Yeah.
and finding that middle ground is not easy, but it has much better rewards than trying to be too conservative or be too reckless.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Of course, but now you look at some movies and they're conservative in a different way. That instead of having an entirely new gambling their money on an entirely new franchise, you get Toy Story 8.
yeah, and I've kept a close eye on the state of things, and a lot of that is self-inflicted wounds.
Hmm.
Uh, and a good amount of that is just ridiculous amounts of overspending, the scrapbooking method of making a bunch of different story beats and endings, and then putting them out and testing to see which one you're going to use. Which sounds nice on paper, but in reality, it means you're making the same movie three times before you even get into editing. Uh, i.e., you're shooting more stuff than you're actually going to use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
And
hey, you're right. You're exactly right on that.
yeah, and then the whole fix it in post attitude. So you end up having to do reshoots or rewrites, which is going to drive the cost up even more.
Hmm. Yeah, and hopefully the actors are still around when you're doing that.
Hmm.
And
Oh.
I mean, there's just so many things involved in that. But you know,
Hmm.
I'm gonna get back to what you're doing with the interviews in your channel. Um,
Yeah.
how many different games? I mean, I know you've interviewed 900 plus people, 900 plus interviews. Have you seen where your interviews have help get a game going, and you can look back and be real proud of the fact that you showed people a particular game?
Yeah, plenty of times.
Mm. What's the one? What's
Whether
one
it
that
be
sticks out
interviews
for you?
or in reviews or even live streams.
Yeah, what's one that sticks out for you?
Um, there's a few. One of them was Savage Kingdoms,
Mm.
which is done by Fire in the Head Productions and is a very sword and sorcery affair.
Mm.
And the original Kickstarter didn't pan out. I had given my condolences to the guy behind it, and I said, maybe you'd have a better run of it trying on Indiegogo. And this was before Indiegogo became a glorified Sky Mall ad like it is these days. And he ended up trying that. It actually worked. He was able to get the funding that he wanted, and he was able to put the game out and then later on redid that to do the Savage East expansion.
Mhm.
And it's good, and he's further been able to ride that momentum into a recent third edition of Savage Kingdoms, which I did cover in a review.
That's that's
Uh,
that's got to feel pretty
in
good. I mean, when you see that you really had influence in that, and
Yeah,
you realize that what you're doing does make differences in
yeah,
how these things go. I mean, that's
and
gotta that's
I've gotten my fair share of comments about how after I covered something that somebody ended up buying that game based and what I had said played a factor.
hmm
And it's for that reason that I have taken the approach I do with reviews or even just assessing my take on a given work very seriously.
hmm
Because there is that non-zero chance that something I say may play a factor in someone's purchasing decisions.
right.
And if that's going to be the case, then I have to make sure that I'm presenting that material in as fair of a light as possible so that someone could make as informed a decision as possible.
That sounds like integrity to me. How dare you?
Yeah, how dare a guy like me who spent way too much time watching and reading stories about characters who had a strong moral code, whether it be in chivalry or Bushido or even superhero codes of honor, have his own code of ethics.
There's no room for ethics.
Then If there's no room, then I'm gonna make room, and I've got plenty of shovels to do it.
There you go.
And if that doesn't work, I can always get out the TNT.
Well, that's true too. That's true too. Well,
And
I think you're doing a tremendous job with this. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding, and people are coming up to you now. And whenever you start anything like this, whether it's what you're doing with interviews, what I'm doing with interviews, and you start off trying to get it going, there's going to be a rough patch, and then once they see what you're doing, and once they see that you're dedicated to what you're doing, and you're talented enough to keep it going, then it'll start to feed itself, and it'll start rolling, and people will get involved in it a little bit more. That's obviously what's happened with you, and it's well deserved. I mean,
and
you've really gone way over. I mean, you couldn't have expected when you started almost 1,000 interviews by now.
no, but in terms of that rough patch, I will note this. I may have a little bit of bias because having an athletic background, I'm used to the idea of I'm gonna get my ass kicked before I start getting good at it. Um, my mentor had always said, if at first you don't succeed, you're in good company. But there's a story that was told by motivational speaker Eric Thomas,
Hmm.
and it's been described in a video called How to Be Successful. And it ultimately comes down to how bad someone wants to be. And Eric goes into this whole thing about how most people don't want to be successful. They just kind of want it.
Right.
Uh, that the if you really want it, you should want it at the same level that you need air to breathe.
Mm.
He likened it to when someone has an asthma attack, they're not thinking about anything else but getting some air.
Right.
And that sort of thing of I'm going to move heaven, hell, and everything in between to make this work was my mindset going in. The interview thing wasn't the initial plan. Originally, it was just going to be me doing reviews, but the intent was still there. I'm going to find a way to make this work, even though I have absolutely no training in this. I knew I wanted to make videos, but I had no idea how video editing worked. But I was like, I'm going to find a way to make this work.
Right.
Uh, I did not know, and I did not have any idea of the protocols when it comes to VTubing, but I'm like, I'm going to make that work,
Hmm.
and I'm going to do it in my way.
Exactly. Exactly. And I disagree when you talk about, not having we the one thing that a good interviewer needs, and people can say whatever they want about how I do it, is you have to have curiosity,
Mhm.
and you have to want to know what the other person is talking about, because if you don't, then you're going to come off as just talking into a microphone to somebody, and the people who are listening aren't going to give a flying crap about it.
Yeah.
And
As a
and
general rule, whenever I've nailed down that I'm going to have a certain guest, I try and ask them if there's anything like a in progress draft, an ashcan version, or something like that, something that I can study
Mhm.
leading up to the interview. And I usually set up them about a week in advance.
Right. Right. And you do. I'm doing like just introducing people to people. You're
Mhm.
doing products that need a more detailed approach, and that's the way to do it. That's exactly the way
Yeah.
to do it, and you've proven that time
Mhm.
900 sometimes you've proven that.
Yeah.
But if people can watch television or whatever, listen to the radio to interviews, you're going to be able to tell when that interviewer does not care.
And contrary to popular belief, I didn't develop my interview style watching like late night or something like that. I'm well aware that late night television is more of a performance.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
The big influence for me in terms of how I developed my interview style was actually um, morning radio, uh,
Well,
morning radio and sports radio.
yeah, yeah.
Got guys like and I I'm gonna list off some names that a lot of people listening to this will not have heard of unless they grew up in the Twin Cities area.
Mm-hmm.
But guys like Dan Cole, the Common Man, guys like Paul Allen and Jeff Dubay,
Mm-hmm.
guys like Dark Star.
Mm-hmm.
Um, though even folks who are doing morning radio on music stations like Tom Bernard.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to a lot of that every single morning, and also listening to like stand-up comics when they have to have those back and forths help develop that style.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen some people say, "Oh, you got your style from Howard Stern." I never grew up in the tri-state area, so I barely have any exposure to Howard Stern as opposed to somebody who might be living in like New York or New Jersey or something like that.
Right. But I mean, when you speak of Twin Cities, are you talking the northern Twin Cities, or are you talking other Twin Cities? Because the one
I'm talking Minneapolis and St. Paul.
yes. So Mike Grimm up there, who who is a tremendous guy.
Mhm.
I talked to Mike
I mean,
a hundred times.
Yeah, I haven't met him, but
Yeah.
I know of him.
Yeah, he's really good, a real broadcaster's broadcaster, and a lot of these guys know what they're doing. When you've got somebody who is in that position, any position, and they're comfortable with that, then they're comfortable talking to you about it. And
Hmm.
once you kind of break through it's with anybody, like you're talking to wrestlers, you're talking to athletes, somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, I'm a big fan." There goes the window up. You're not going to be able to talk to them as a human being. If you come up and you start talking to them like they're, the guy you're handing a coffee to in the morning, then you get a chance to talk to them like human beings. It makes a difference. And it's obvious that some people are able to do that naturally and some people aren't. But your style is very much like that.
Hmm.
You're just able to very easily get into it with them, get them interested in talking to you. You're interested in talking to them, and the result is interesting.
Yeah, and I never come up to anybody saying I'm a fan or something like that. Even if I am,
Mm-hmm.
it's more of you're working on something I find interesting. I want to give you a space to talk about it more because I'm not going to have to provoke you too much to have you talk anyone's ear off about this project that you've been working on for years.
Right, right. But I want to ask you some questions that I have
Hmm.
about it because I'm interested in it, and that's when the audience goes for it too. Mildred,
Hmm.
I could talk about this with you 100 times, and I hope we can again.
Oh yeah.
But folks, you absolutely have to go and check out what Mildred's got going on. Those interviews are amazing. Everything else he does too. We're going to have all of the links that we can been able to find on the description of this interview. Thank you so much.
I didn't even get to the RPG I'm developing.
Oh, so we are going to get to that eventually because we're going to have you on again real soon. Okay?
Yeah. Hoping I can bring my brother along with that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, let's do
See
it
what
all.
sort of chaos we end up making.
I'll just give you the mics and you go. I'll just record it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man.
Thank you for listening to Eric Loy Interviews. Join us again next time when we talk to another member of the always interesting VTuber community.